All right, so here's what I think we can do. We're going to go over just some basics like business model, and then we'll look at this tool called the business model canvas, and then we'll go into how to translate the canvas into a business plan. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at some different model types. Okay, so basically what this is going to help us do is maybe you know, like we're looking for like a perspective shift. So we'll do that. Okay. I'm going to plan on doing just going real quick over the business model and the business model canvas. And then we're going to do like number 3. So basically 1, 2, and 3. My goal is to cover that in probably like 30 minutes or so. And then we can spend the rest of the time talking about maybe the right side of the canvas in terms of like drilling into finding new ideas via our customers, and then maybe looking at a couple of different model types that we can use to, you know, sort of like change it up a little bit. So good morning, Adriana. How are you? It's nice to see you. Okay, so hi. All right, so welcome everyone. This is the Business Model Canvas class, and we just got our agenda set. Thank you everybody for participating in helping us put that agenda together. For, I don't know, between now and 12:30, we're gonna attempt to cover those 4 things right there in the chat. If while we're doing the class you have a question, no need to wait till the end or anything like that. Just pop it directly into the chat or come up and say, hey, Dan, you know, it's discussion, right? Discussion makes it all better. At least that's my opinion in my experience. Okay, so basically the format will be, we'll talk a little bit and then we'll go to the whiteboard. Well, not these whiteboards. I have a whiteboard that's online and it's actually, you know, darker color. So anyways, whatever, I'm just calling it a whiteboard anyways. So we'll go there to kind of look at some concepts and that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's just like this back and forth type thing. And again, if you have questions, feel free to just bring it up. Okay, cool. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen, and there is, let's see. Sorry, I have to bring it up first, don't I? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to get right into this. The key thing about any business model, and this is anything that I've ever seen. I've thought about this for a while. A little bit about who Dan is. I was in the U.S. Army for 11 years, and then I got out in 2009, and I decided to start my own company in Baghdad, Iraq, of all places, and I did. With an Iraqi partner. His name is Saif. I co-founded an internet service provider with him, and it was good times, and I'm still in contact with him today, although my business role is a little different now, but good times. Put in a business, sold internet access to a bunch of folks, and then started getting you know, B2B and some defense contracts and stuff like that, and that was interesting. And then in a seemingly unrelated turn of events, I moved back to the States with my wife in 2012, and we bought a turnkey cupcake and frozen yogurt shop. So at one point I'm doing like internet stuff. I'm monitoring a network from the United States, but the network's in Iraq, and I'm doing cupcakes at the same time. So that was interesting. And that cupcake shop is still going on. That's in Roseville. You know, we've expanded a little bit and then we've like contracted a little bit, just depending on, you know, how things are going and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, what I've become interested in is like, it just fascinated me the way business models worked, how money flows, like the whole psychology of the whole thing, like the whole mechanics of economic, you know, like how does that work? Like that was a thing that I just really, really, really wanted to know. And then the thing that happened is I was like, hey, wait a minute, since I did the internet and I did cupcakes, shit, man, I could do anything, right? So I was like, let me try anything. And I tried like 7 anythings and they didn't work. And I was like, what? What's going on? Like, I thought I had this thing down, right? And as it turns out that I had no idea about how to find customers. What a concept, right? Like that has been the most difficult thing for me to understand as a person doing whatever, right? It's finding customers. And the more I got into it, the more I was like, hey, wait a minute, nobody's talking about this. Other folks need to like know about this. I want to share it. And so I started, talking about the business model canvas, talking about customer discovery, like a systematic process on how to do customer stuff. And here we are. Now I'm an advisor at the Small Business Development Center, trying to pass on my experience and my lessons learned so that other folks can benefit for that. And oh, by the way, keeps me learning too. So I love it. All right, so the boring stuff is out of the way. Let's go to the actual stuff that we came here for today. Thank you for
Not
listening.
boring, not boring.
Okay, thanks, Janisha.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, so here is what I found in any of the business models that I have pursued with the internet service one, with the cupcake thing, with any of the other projects like web development, app development, hardware, all that kind of stuff. I found that basically in any kind of business plan, any kind of business model, I'm just answering these three questions. Number one, can I sell it? Is it like, can I sell it to people? Do they want it? Is it desirable? Number two, can we make it? In other words, hey, I've got this great idea, but can I actually do it? And this is a point that I find a lot of folks, to include myself, start right here. It's like, hey, if I can't even make it, like what's the point? So this is really like a feasibility thing, right? So if the first question is answering desirability, the second question is answering viability, and then feasibility, and then the third thing is, will it make money? And that's a viability question, right? So it's basically like this. It's like, hey, are there people that I can actually help out with my thing? Do they want what I have, basically? And then the second thing is, well, if they want what I have or what I'm promising, can I actually like deliver on it? And I'm just going to make a very badly drawn gear there. Okay, and then the third thing is there enough money so that at the end of the day, my costs are going to exceed, or my revenues will exceed my costs, right? That's really the idea. And that's a little squiggly sign there, known as pi, but you can also use that as a way to describe profit, right? Okay, so it's those three questions that you look in any business plan, they always answer these three questions. Okay, so at a very, very high level, like this is kind of it. Now there's only one other thing that we didn't really address in these three questions, and that is, what is it? Okay, so I will tell you. It is the value proposition. Okay, so the value proposition is that thing of value for which your customers will exchange currency. And so we see this cycle that's sort of like playing out, right? It's like, hey, I've got a thing. I think it's a thing. I think it's valuable, but do the customers think it's valuable? If they think it's valuable, will they give me money for it? And will they give me enough so that I actually make it like as a good quality? So we see this like thing, right? And to me, that simplifies the business planning process a lot, because I can look at this and I can be like, okay, well, can I answer all three of these questions? If I can't, cool, let me try something else, right? So because this is a cycle, this is a circle, that means that it need not ever end. It's just that it's a thing that we do over and over and over again. And so here's what I've learned about failure. Two things. Number one is failures are learning opportunities. And that sounds cute and it sounds cliche. My experience is that it's real. It's only a failure. That's point number two, is it's only a failure when I give up and I quit. Okay. Pivot doesn't count as giving up. Pivot says, let me do something different. Quitting basically means, hey, look, I'm not cut out for this. And cool. It's like when I've had so many different projects, so many different business ideas, and I've pursued them, and I've gotten so far. And my wife has a joke with me. She's like, every 6 months, Dan, you change it up. So I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very cool. But you know what? What was awesome is that I continue to learn every project that I make a mistake on, every project that I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this because I'm not passionate about it. Every project that I actually do stick with, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so it's all been this process. It's all been this journey. So failing in business, in my opinion, is actually very difficult because once you have the bug, it doesn't leave. It's only failing when you give up completely. And that means that giving up on yourself, giving up on your customers and everything like that. So the key is that we're learning. That's the deal, at least for me. Okay, so let's look at how this translates into this thing called the business model canvas. All right, so this is the business model canvas. All right, this is a basically like a business plan on one piece of paper. Now let's look at the business plan really quick, just to give you some reference. This is maybe what you're used to seeing, which is a textual document that basically says, we are a business and we do serious stuff, and this is serious business and we do serious stuff. So you should like take us seriously. Right? Okay, maybe that's Dan's impression of a business plan. Am I like revealing my bias here? Anyways, here's the thing. Okay, so business plans, they talk about stuff, right? What do they talk about? Well, let's look at this. They talk about the marketing plan, they talk about what business you're in, they talk about your operational plan, inventory, management and organization, your finances, all that stuff, right? And you know what? There is a time to get into the details on that. And that's usually when somebody wants to mitigate the risk that they're taking in investing in you. And so a written business plan is totally appropriate, especially when you want to articulate it. What you're doing, right? Is it a thing that we have to jump right into all the time? My opinion is no. Really, what I like to do is I like to get my head around what's actually happening so that I can put it in this format. Because it's been my experience that if I know what's actually going on and how things work and they mesh together, then I can put this in the form of a written business plan. I can put this in the form of a slide deck. I can put this in the form of like a 1-minute pitch. You know, as long as I know what's going on, I can slice and dice it any way I want. Okay. And I find that the canvas actually helps me do that. Okay. So what I would like to do now is share with you how this thing works. All right, so we went through those 3 questions, right? Can we sell it? Can we make it? Will it make money? And then the big thing is, what is it? Okay, so, all right. Here's our value proposition, and we already said that the value proposition is that thing for which our customers will exchange currency. Now, it can be physical things, it can be intangible things, it can be like stuff that's not even talked about. It's really, when we look at value, value usually has basically 2 sides to it. Value is basically what it is. So I'll just call this like the form factor, right? And the form factor, oops, the form factor is, it can be like hardware, software, or a service, or typically a combination of all 3 of those things. And then the other thing is intrinsically, what does it mean? To the customers, right? And if we know these 2 things, then we have a value proposition, okay? All right, so let's look at this part first. Can we sell it? So is it desirable? I'm gonna move this sticky note over here, and it's basically gonna reveal 3 questions that kind of answer that whole desirability thing. So what are the 3 things? Well, customer segments, right here, and then we have channels, and then we have customer relationships. Now, a quick word. about this, I have found a magic formula, and this is a magic formula for me. That doesn't necessarily have to be one for you. But for me, if I get the value proposition right, I get the channels right, and I get the customer segments right, man, I have got a really, really, really good, solid foundation for a business case. For me, this is the missing piece in the puzzle. You remember in the very beginning, I said, well, I failed at this, I failed at this, I failed at that, whatever, right? It's because I didn't have this piece in place. I didn't even know about the piece. How was I supposed to have it? So, okay, so what is it? What's in it? Well, let's look at it. The first one over here is customer segments. Okay, so you remember how we just talked about this value proposition being like the form factor and also what it actually means? Well, as it turns out, just like a puzzle piece, the customer segment is a person or a group of people that have similar needs for the form factor and similar needs for what it actually means to them. So for me, what I like to think about is in terms of like each customer has two needs. She has a functional need and she has an emotional need. Okay. Now the functional thing is basically that thing that we can see, right? It's the form factor. The functional need. Hey, I need a thing to do another thing. I need a machine to pick up all the dirt in my house. I need a notebook so I can write stuff down. I need a piece of software that's going to help me get from point A to point B, right? So that's kind of like what we see in front of us. Now, the other thing, the emotional need, is that thing of behind the surface, underneath the surface. Like, what is there that needs to really be addressed? Well, I need a notebook so I can write down stuff that's bouncing around in my head so I don't have to think about it, so I can actually concentrate on something else. Is that something that I actually articulate in like ads and like, you know, when I'm telling somebody about this notebook, like, do I think about that? No, I think about, hey, I need a notebook to do a thing, basically, right? Okay, so, but the way we actually communicate emotional needs and emotional fixes is with colors, and we do it with the tone, and we do it with you know, all those intangibles, right? So we're starting to see like this linkage between the value proposition and customers, right? So emotional needs are basically what the thing means to somebody, and the functional need basically answers, or the form factor answers the functional need. Okay, so somebody asked, is there a way to print out these handouts? And I'll say, absolutely there are. Give me a quick second. I'm going to come back here real quick, and I'm going to drop a business model canvas in the chat so that we can get that together. In the meantime, are there any questions so far on what we've looked at?
No, not so far.
Okay, all right, cool, thank you. All right.
You're doing great.
Thank you, Janisha.
You're welcome.
Okay, downloads, let's go here. There we go. Let's try that one. Okay, so what I did is I put a PDF in the chat, and you should be able to click on it and download it. And let me know if you can't, and then we'll pause and just do an email thing. Okay, let's go back to the canvas again. Wow, this looks a little messy. Do we need to clean this up? Let's clean it up just a little bit. Let's take this line. Oops, I just made it messier. Okay, so let's clean this up just a little bit. Here we go. Maybe that's good. Okay, so here's what we got.
I did actually have a question. So I got that you said that emotional need is it's what it means to the person, but the functional need, you said something about the value proposition, or what was that?
Okay, so the idea is that I have a customer, and a customer has something that needs to be done. So the customer has this thing called a functional need, right? Oops. Okay, so the functional need is basically answered with the form factor of the value proposition. And then the emotional need is answered with what it actually means. So let's take an example.
So you said I'm sorry, so the functional need is basically just what they like needing a notebook, like you said, basically they actually need the product.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
You're
Did you
welcome.
explain?
Okay, so yeah, so the value proposition is basically like, we when we look at a business or we think about a business, like my tendency is to always think about, oh, it's going to be this product or this service that's going to like fix a problem for somebody, right? But what sometimes I neglect is, okay, well, this is what it's actually going to do for somebody. Like it's going to make them feel better. It's going to help them in their lives somehow. It's going to answer this like existential angst that they have. I'm just kidding, but like there's definitely an emotional component that I'm playing to whenever I present a value proposition to a customer. Okay, do we need to do an example, or can we go on?
I'm good.
Cool, thank you, Janisha.
No.
Okay. All right, so let's erase some of this real quick, just to clean it up. Okay. So right here, we've got our customer segments. Okay, so what is a customer segment? It's basically a grouping of people with similar functional needs and emotional needs, right? And so you can have several different types of customers. In the notebook example, we can have people that love to journal, people that just need to organize stuff, and we can also have people that need to do some introspection. Okay, so there's three different types of people that want to use it for what it offers, but it might mean three different things to each of these people, right? And so all we're doing with the customer segments is we're just grouping out similar people in similar categories. Okay, all right. So that's that. Now let's talk about channels, because I said, or I learned in my journey that the channels was the missing. So if I have the value prop and then I have the customers, then I definitely need to look at channels. And if I have that, then I've got the magic piece for me. So what's a channel? A channel is basically two things. It is, number one, how I deliver my value proposition to the customer. And number two is how I communicate. Okay, so so if we look at this channels thing, right, it seems like it could be a bridge between the value proposition and the customer, right? So a customer needs a thing. How do I deliver it? Well, via point of sale. I deliver it via mail. I deliver it via email. I deliver it via retail, whatever, right? This is like just plain and simple logistics right here. Okay. The second piece is what I found to be sort of like an art form, is how do I, in this busy world, in all these folks' world, how do I get this message to them that I have what they need and it's going to help them feel the way they need to feel? That is difficult. And that's one of the things that for me was the most baffling. And it's a little less baffling now. It still entails a lot of work, a lot of testing, but I at least have a system and a process. So just like the delivery, this is a bridge too. It's just, how do I get ideas into my customers' heads when they're busy? No easy task, at least insofar as I've experienced that. Okay, so let me come down here and I want to explain this really quick. Okay, let me just register the pen there. Okay. All right. All right. So communication channels, right? These are basically just how we get the message out to customers. And we do this, like, I know that you know how we do this, right? It's social media, it's ads, it's email,
Hi,
it's newsletters,
where'd it go?
it is business cards,
Yeah, did
flyers,
we
speaking, networking events,
Okay.
et
And
cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's like a lot. And the good news is that there's a lot of communications channels out there. The bad news is there's a lot of communication channels out there,
total amount.
right? Because as it turns out, there's like so many different ways to communicate with customers. How do we figure out like which ones actually work? That's the biggest challenge that I've found in understanding what this communications block is. Okay, so in a nutshell, and I do whole other classes on this subject. So if it doesn't resonate right away, it's cool. Don't worry about it, because there is a lot to know, at least for me. So what I need to do is I need to understand that customer's functional need and emotional need. And then what I need to do is understand how to present that value proposition in a story that actually answers both of those things. So I basically need to tell a story, okay? And I got to make sure that I know what that story is and that it's correct. And depending on each customer segment, the story might look a little different. All right, cool. That makes sense, right? Now, the next thing is, okay, well, where do I put the story? And that's what the channels block is all about, right? So let's imagine this as a bullseye. And let's say that I have all these channels at my disposal. And this is how I start figuring out which channels are actually like, going to be working for me, because there's a lot of them. And there's simply too many to try all at once. So what I do is I look at the 19 or 21, actually 21 right now, basic channels that I've got. Like social media is only one of them. Like there's other channels, right? So I basically look at all of them and I say, what can I do with what I got right now to tell this story in this channel? And it's just a thought exercise. So I'll just think through all of that. And I call that the outer ring test. Just seeing, hey, what can I do? And then what I do is I say, okay, well, acknowledging that, all 21 are too much to try right now, let me just go with 6. Let me try 6. And it doesn't have to be always 6. It can be like 7, it can be 5, whatever. But it's like the channels that I can do like right now. And I act as if I have a product, I put it in the market, I act as if I already have traffic, and I'm just trying out these channels, right? I'm pitching my story via these channels. So this would be pitching the notebook on maybe Facebook. This would be giving a demonstration of the notebook on a webinar. It would be talking about the notebook, in like a podcast episode on somebody else's podcast. You start to get the idea, right? Like I'm just trying out different channels. Now, I only want to do 6 of them because limited time, money, bandwidth, that kind of thing. And once I find out which channel I actually get traction with, like where are people actually responding to me, what I get is I get this thing that I'll call a core channel. And so a core channel is maybe that podcast really did it for me, right? And I actually got listeners and I actually got people to like visit the site and all that other kind of stuff, right? And I'm like, oh, well, it looks like the podcast actually works. So let me explore this a little bit. So what I do is I zoom back out and I say, okay, well, if I have this one channel that I know works, let me put that into my channels block right there. And let me say that maybe the podcast works. Okay. So now we're starting to see how this thing kind of hangs together in terms of, how I'm getting this business thing to work. We're going to zoom in a little bit. It's basically like this. Look, switching pens right now. Hold on a second. Okay. So I've got a value proposition and it answers functional needs and emotional needs for my customers. So I have customers. And then I make sure that I understand how to deliver that message to my customers in an effective, repeatable way so that I can get more customers, right? So make it worth it. And then I deliver it. That's pretty cool. So now I see this. You remember in the beginning we talked about cycles? We said this whole thing is a cycle, right? Between desirability, feasibility, viability. Well, this is a mini cycle inside of the main cycle. Is this always back and forth conversation between me and my customer? Now, in the beginning of our session this morning, we said, well, one of the things that we wanted to look at was, well, how do I come up with new ideas, or how do I innovate, or how do I just, think outside the box? Well, for me, one of the things, I mean, there's 3 areas where we can think outside the box, right? And this is one of them. So this area right here is where I start thinking outside of the box. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I know I have a thing, right? But let me show you like how, like what order I think about things in to get a new result. Okay. I'm going to erase all of it. All right. Now we have we got some freshness. All right. So, if I have an idea for, this is like traditionally how I'll start building a business once I know, right? If I have a value proposition that I know is out there in the market and I know this works and all that other kind of stuff, then I'm like, okay, I have a value proposition. I've got customers. This is how I deliver it. This is how I communicate it. And now the cycle's complete, right? Traditionally, this is how I, go about starting a business that, where the market is known. But when things change and I need to think outside the box, what's the order that I go in then? Well, here, let me just write this down. We're just going to call this the green line. We're going to call this order number 1. Okay, so let's talk about order number 2. Okay, so this is cool, right? So I'm having a good time. I hope you guys are having a good time. Okay, so I'm going to call this one 0.5 for like step 0.5. I'm going to look at my value proposition and I say, I think I've got an idea, and I think I've got something new that I can offer people, but I'm not quite sure, right? So the second thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to call this number 1. Actually, look, the green line, I'm going to call this green line A, just to avoid any confusion, okay? Mostly confusion with me. Okay, so going back to the purple. So if I want to think outside the box, this is what I do. I start off here with number 0.5, and I'm like, okay, I think I've got an idea. Now what I want to do is I want to go to step 1, which is, let me see if there's any customers for it. Or let me go back to my current customers, have a talk with them, understand where they're at, what their problems are, any new things that have come up for them. And then I want to be like, oh, well, is what I'm doing good enough for them right now? Or can I do something that's really going to like provide them with an awesomer experience? More awesome experience, whatever. I can't, anyways, right? So that's number 1. That's like right after that. So I kind of start here and I go over here to the customers. And then the customers are going to tell me, yeah, I like that idea that you have, but what if it could do this, or what if it could do that, right? And so I go into this second iteration of the value proposition. So I come back over here again and I say, okay, well, number 2, let me refine this value proposition. Let me say, okay, well, based on the conversations that I have with my customers, let me see if I can just make this into a killer experience. That's what I want to do, okay? And how do I do that? Well, I talk with my inner circle about this idea, and they give me some feedback. And then I talk about this with my outer circle of friends, and they give me more feedback. And once I think I have a thing, then I'm ready. I basically put it out into the market. Okay, so for innovation, I go 0.5, I go 0.1, and then I go to number 2 over here. And then when I think I have a thing, then I come back over here to channels. And I really want to dial in my core channel to make sure that I've got that story right, to make sure that I've got the channel and the marketing method right. And then what I do is I push this back out to the customers to see, hey, did I get it right? Okay, cool. So let's look at this example. The green line, line number A, or line letter A. Okay, I have a notebook. It is a thing that I can use to write stuff down in. It's also good because it helps me unload my thoughts so I can have clarity and peace of mind, right? Cool. So I know that this is a market and I know that it exists. So what I'm going to do as if I'm following, line number A, is I'm going to say, I'm going to buy a bunch of notebooks and I'm going to market it in places that are known markets like Facebook or Amazon, that kind of thing. And then what I'm going to do is when I get an order, I'm going to deliver it through the mail or, I'm going to allow people to, maybe friends to pick it up, or I'm going to take it to them or whatever. Right. And once that's successful, then I start saying, okay, well, more people need to know about the notebook and I'm going to keep pushing this out via advertising and all that other kind of stuff. Right. And that's how I do the green line. Now, the blue or the purple line, what if, hey, wait a minute, you know what? I have this idea. I'm like, I know that this is a notebook. It's just a notebook, right? But what if it could do different things for different people, right? What if, some of the problems that I have with a notebook is, if I'm working through something, let's pick introspection, like daily introspection. Let's say that, maybe I'm working from a workbook or I'm doing writing prompts or something like that. Like the only thing about the notebook is it's great, but it's just blank. But what if I had like insertable printable sheets that were this size, they fit it perfectly, and I could guide somebody through a process or something like that in their journaling. Would that be cool? I don't know. It seems like it's cool. I just don't know for sure. And so what I would do, that's 0.5, right? And so I would do is come over to come over to 1 over on the customer segments right here. And I'd be like, I'd ask a few folks, I'm like, hey, do you guys journal? Like, how do you do it? What do you do? Like, what are the things that you're thinking about? Like, do you ever wish it was different? Now, I'm not pitching my idea at this point. All I'm doing is I'm just asking, right? And they give me feedback. They're like, oh yeah, this one time I really wish that I had this for the notebook or that for the notebook. And yeah, it is kind of limited in this sense. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I take all that data and then I come back here to number 2 and I'm like, oh, well, you know what? I thought I needed to have printables and all that other kind of stuff. And it turns out all I really need is like, I just need to change the binding on this thing, right? Because people are already like pulling pages out and putting pages in. Like, I just need to make it easier for them to do that. And I learned that from talking to the customers in the customer segment blog. So let's say that I do that and I'm like, okay, let me get a nasty looking, just bare bones prototype going on. I show that to my inner circle. They're like, I don't know, man. It's metal. I like plastic. And I'm like, okay, cool. So, go back, change it to plastic. And then I show it. I say, okay, I think I got it right for you guys. And then I go to people that don't know me as well. And I'm like, okay, tell me your experience with this. And they don't even need to know that I've actually like created this thing. I just want to see their reaction. And they'll tell me, yeah, it's all right. I'm like, what do you mean just all right? Like, what would make it awesome? And they could tell me like, oh, well, I see that the plastic rings are there and there's 3 of them, but it's all kind of just like it's squishy. So it needs more stability. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I go back and I change that. And so if my inner circle, like they've given me feedback and my outer circle have given me feedback on this, like, down and dirty prototype, then once I fix those things, I can go back and I can be like, okay, well, I think I got it. And so that's when I say, I'm going to take this to a small market just to start out. And then I'm going to go and show that to the customers again and see what happens. And they'll either like it, they'll love it, or they won't. And I'm going for, I want them to love it, right? Because I'm wanting to provide a killer experience for them because I'm trying to think outside the box, right? And if they love it, awesome. Then I've got problem, solution, fit. If they don't love it, then I need to go back and keep working on this. So that's how I start thinking about like how to like just shake things loose. Now, sometimes what folks tell me is they're like, Dan, this is great and all, but I got to pay bills tomorrow. Indeed, I agree. This process can be lengthy or it can be short. I'll bet you that you are already doing this process and you do it naturally. It's just talking with people and serving them and seeing what they need. You already do this. When I think about needing to change a product line or make bigger plans or stuff like that with my business, I go in a little deeper. When I just need to make a quick change, I come out and I'm like, okay, let me think about this quickly. So the cool thing about this canvas, for me anyways, is that I can think about it from a very high level or from a very granular level. And, it just depends on where I'm at. Now, I do have to avoid the overthinking trap, right? Which is, when I start spending way too much time on one particular block, if I start getting really in the weeds on the channels or the customers or the value proposition or whatever, then I'm like, oh, maybe I need to move on, right? Because all these things have to balance together, right? They all need to like gel at the same time. And if they don't, then I just end up with just a massive thought session that really doesn't lead anywhere, right? Okay, so balance is key with that. Okay, so let's zoom back out. And I'm just gonna finish up this discussion on can we sell it? We've talked about the value proposition. We've talked about customer segments and channels. And now this other thing up here is customer relationships. What does that mean? Well, the way I like to think about this block is it's sort of like a timeline. I'm just going to draw a timeline like that. Okay, and on one end, I'm going to put a T, and on the other end, I'm going to put an L. All right, and basically the T represents transactional, and the L represents lifetime. So a transactional type relationship or a lifetime type relationship with a customer is really what I'm trying to get at here. And at this point in the planning stage, I don't need to be very specific with this. This is just a subjective kind of thought. So if I'm selling hamburgers, I mean, yeah, I want repeat business and all, but at the very fundamental level, it's a transactional thing. I'm selling hamburgers, right? Or notebooks. Now, if I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm selling a self-help workbook. Maybe what I do is I turn that into less of a transactional thing, especially if there's like courses and lessons and growth with the customers or something like that. That's a little bit of a longer term relationship. Now if I'm like, okay, I'm going to have this whole series of notebooks that's going to help you through life events like birth, marriage, midlife crisis maybe, which some people say that Dan has had, which is that's the only reason I'm bringing that up that's my own experience. Midlife crisis, I don't know, deep introspective period maybe, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, so if I'm making these notebooks and I'm doing it for like different lifetime events and all that kind of stuff, then maybe what I have is sort of like a more of a lifetime value type relationship with customers, right? So that's what that block is about. I don't spend a lot of time on this block, just enough to get me a quick indication, because the idea is it's going to change, right? And I don't want to spend too much time on it. Okay, so that kind of answers the whole desirability piece. What I'd like to do real quick is just pause, and then I promise we're going to go through the feasibility and the viability thing. It'll be a little quicker than that one. This one was typically the hardest for me, and I just wanted to at least share how I think about it in the hopes that maybe it helps others. And so what I like to do now is pause for a second and see, is there any questions on the right-hand side of the on the right-hand side of the canvas before we go on to the other side?
No, I don't have any.
So I have a question, Dan. So in terms of channels, some things you can use, social media or webinars or demos kind of to test. But what if it requires a bigger investment, like restaurants? It's like, so right now there are many options, right? Like, is it a kiosk or a cart or a food truck before you make the investment of a big restaurant? So when it's something that is kind of very functional, right? But you need to kind of have the people taste it or something. How do you test channels that require a high investment and that it cannot be digital?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I'm thinking about how to explain this. So here's how I do it. You know how you make a giant snowball? You start with a small snowball, right? So you like a little kernel and that kind of thing. You're like, okay, does this work? Yeah, that works. And then you go to the bigger thing and then the next thing, right? That's at least how I start. I start with like the bare minimum of what I can get away with. And then once I have proof that, you know, I can repeat this process, then I take the next step, which is the next bigger step. And then once I have proof that I can repeat that process, then I take the next bigger step. So it's methodical for sure. Um, you know, my personal risk tolerance is I don't like to take a bunch of risk up front, because I've done that in the past and lost badly. um, so my risk tolerance now is more where like I'm like, okay, let me take what I can afford, test it out, and if that works, great. Let me take the next step. So it's not as exciting, but I find that it actually helps me get my goal, at least for me. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful. It's obviously more complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah, I mean, at some point there is risk that you have to assume and that you have to take on, right? But you know, that's where like educated guesses come in and that kind of stuff. So if you want to get specific, I'm happy to talk with you, like get another, you know, like in a session or something like that, if you want,
Thank you.
or refer you to somebody that can talk specifics.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, cool. So awesome. You guys are great. I'm having a great time. I hope you are too. Let's look at the rest of this. Excuse me. And we're not going to take as much time on those other pieces as we are on this one, or as we did on the right side, just so that you know, because we do definitely want to get to that model discussion. Okay, so the next thing is, can we make it, right? So, you know, just coming back to those 3 questions, can we sell it? Well, we beat that one into the ground. Let's look at, can we make it? Okay, so I found out that, you know, there's usually some key components that are always the same, and I can look at those using the business model canvas, right? So let's just slide this sticky over here. All right. Now, here's the thing. Key resources, key activities, and key partners. Very simply, the resource is, I lost my pen, hold on a second. Oh, there it is, okay. All right, so the key resource is basically what I need to make it happen. Okay, so this is usually supplies, equipment, and people. This is generally what I think about when I think about key resources. Like, what do I need to make it work? What do I need to actually make it? And do I need some help to do it, like to actually produce it, right? Okay. So let's look at the activities here. So what's an activity? Well, an activity for me is basically anything that ends in ing. Okay. So if resources were, what do I need to make it happen? Then key activities are, what do I need to do to make it happen? Okay. So it's basically your core competencies, like what you're really, really good at that help you make it. Okay. So are there categories for this? Yeah, you could probably think about like supplying, making, selling, that kind of thing. If I wanted to get more specific, this is usually when I get more specific. So as a consultant, what I do is I find myself teaching, coaching, and also producing content. Those are like the 3 things that I do over and over again. For the cupcake shop, it's baking, packaging, and selling. For the internet business, it was infrastructure, like putting in the wire that would carry the internet or the antennas that would beam it back and forth. It was configuring the network so that it worked for people. And then it was also a bunch of service calls, right? So it's basically those things we're just gonna like the things we need to do to make it work, or to make it happen. Okay. All right. So that kind of answers the activities and the resources. Now, I'm only one person with, you know, a brain ostensibly and two hands and maybe like 24 hours in a day, just like everybody else. So sometimes this is way too much for me to do. And I need to enlist the help of some friends. Or maybe not friends, at least. I just need some help. Right? We'll call those key partners. And that's what this block is all about. Okay, so key partners are usually people that help me make it, supply it, or sell it. Okay, so basically, the way this is working over here is I'm like, okay, well, I have vendors, I have suppliers, I have people that help me with business services and all that other kind of stuff, right? So my key partners are helping me do it. They're helping me with my activities. They're also helping me get my resources together so that I can actually create it. So there's that other cycle that we talked about over there, right? Now I find that this right here, for me, is one of the easier things to think about when I'm doing a business plan or when I'm putting together a business concept. And it's because this is all problem solving, right? This is my problem. I need to make a thing. But how am I going to do that? Well, I need this and I need that. And I need to like make a process in order to like make it efficient and all that kind of stuff. And then I need to come over here and I need to find people to help me do that, right? So the good news for me is I already know what I don't know. Awesome. Comparing that with this other side, the desirability side, like I don't even know what I don't know with customers. And so that's why I like to prioritize what I'm doing over here. Is because if I know what the problem is, then I at least have a target, right? Now, that doesn't make this side any less challenging to execute, right? Because it's real problems and it's real things that we're trying to make. And a lot of times it's just hard. I mean, right? That's part of the nature of like making something new for people that doesn't exist. And so you got to put it together and that's hard. And that's actually for me, the production side is really fun until it's not. But you know, most of the time it's pretty fun. Like coming up with something and then watching people like use it, interact with it, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's the left-hand side of the canvas. Before we go on to the final piece, the viability, I'd like to pause and see if there's any questions about the feasibility side of the business model. I see none. Shall we continue? Let's continue. Okay, so on one side we have the desirability, the other side we have the feasibility. Now that whole thing that people are like, oh, do I have a business or not? Well, how do you tell if it's a hobby or a business? Well, there's nothing wrong with hobbies. Hobbies are awesome because you can actually affect great change with hobbies. And you can actually make a big impact with things that you love to do. Now, the differentiator, at least for purposes of this discussion on what's a hobby and what's a business, is the business is something that takes in more revenues than it puts out in revenues, right? So in other words, there's profit there. Now, you can still be a nonprofit and still be a business. It just means that you're generating profit. It's just not, number one, the most important thing. And number two, you don't want to be left with it anyways, right? Okay, so what makes a business, like I said, at least in terms of this discussion, is it making money? How is it making money? And will it continue to make money in the future? How do we figure that out? Well, let's go over to the board again. And I'm going to just Oh man, that's messy. Let's get rid of that. Let's just clean it up a little bit so we know what we're thinking about. Alrighty, almost there, guys. Three more, no, like three more like stubborn little dots. Okay, they're they're good. I'm gonna need a bigger eraser. Okay, so down here, let's look at this. Will it make money? We're gonna look at this viability thing. Okay, now if at some point you've ever seen these scary looking words, financial projections, break even, cash flow, assets and liabilities, like I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it right now. Just kidding. I face my fears. You know, that midlife crisis we talked about. Anyways, so this is where we start getting into some of the stuff, you know, that you see in like in the business plan, and like, you know, I gotta get my head around it and all that other kind of stuff, right? This is a very simple spreadsheet, even though it may look somewhat complicated to some of us. Is really the idea here is I've got cash coming in, so this is in and this is out, right? And basically what I'm doing is I'm subtracting the in from the out, and I'm getting the profit, right? That's pretty much what it does. Okay, so in other classes, like we actually have at the SBDC, we have cash flow class, we have break even class, and really where we're looking at this spreadsheet, we're just kind of like breaking it down in terms of like numbers and specifics. You'll notice here that there are basically just like categories of revenues right here. You can get granular with that, or you could just call it cash sales, or you could just, you know, whatever kind of category you want. And then over here, the categories for your expenses. Basically, the more you itemize, the easier it is to understand how things are being offset here. And then really, so this is really what you got to get right. That's it. Like, just paying attention to the categories. And then over here where it says month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, etc., all you're doing is you're putting in like either things that already happened or things that are gonna happen. That's it, right? And you're just letting Excel do the math for you and understanding, okay, well, what's our profitability gonna look like next month, or what's it gonna look like a year from now, or whatever. Like, it's cool once you get the hang of it, because then you can, like, all of a sudden you've got this like crystal ball you can use to like look into the future. All right, well, let's look at this conceptually and see how this kind of plays out. First, what I'd like to do is look at the chat real quick. Oh, cool, Cynthia, I'm so glad. Let's see. Yeah, I do have a spreadsheet, and I can share that with you. I'll tell you what, folks, if at some point you want to get any of these materials to include the recording, hold on. Okay, I put my email address in the chat right there. If you'd like at some point to ask for the recording, ask for the materials or something like that, just send me an email there, and I can make sure that I'll respond with the appropriate collateral. Okay, cool. All right, now let's talk about this conceptually, and we'll do this, I don't know, probably take about maybe 5, maybe 7 minutes, because we already saw like the big sheet, which is like all the things, right? Let's break this down. Let's make this real simple, okay? All right, so let's talk about cost real quick, because we just got done talking about like the left-hand side of the canvas, right? We need stuff like, we basically, like, all these things up here, like the resources are going to cost money, the activities are going to cost money, and if we enlist the help of our partners, sometimes friends, we will need to pay them as well, right? Okay, so all these things cost money. And this is how I think about costs, okay? There are two main or broad categories that I think about. And so I just divide this box into two. And one is, startup cost. And then the other one is ongoing cost. Pretty simple, because it's two, right? Okay, so startup costs are basically anything that I need to do to start up the business, right? So it's like I need, and if I'm innovating and I want a new product that I'm making or something like that, I'm like, okay, well, I just treat that as like a startup, right? A new product line, a new service, a new thing. Like, okay, let me just, categorize that as a new part of the business, right? So there's going to be startup costs and there's always going to be ongoing costs, right? Startup costs are basically my baseline, what I'm going to need to actually just get it off the ground, right? So they're mostly, I consider these like one-time costs. Purchases of equipment, purchases of like a baseline inventory, purchases of like if I'm like working with a contractor and they need like a setup fee or a build out or something like that, that all goes into startup costs. Okay, now let's look at, so that's startup. Let's look at ongoing. Now we're going to break this down a little bit further, and we're going to say, okay, well, there's two types of ongoing costs that I have. The ones that I like and the ones that I don't like. Actually, I'm just kidding. I don't like any of them. The ones that are less preferred and less preferred. How about that? Okay, so my ongoing costs are basically in two categories. One is called fixed cost, and the other one is called variable cost. Okay, so my fixed cost is basically those costs that just they stay the same. They stay the same month after month. And when I say stay the same, it means that they're relatively predictable, right? Like rent is always pretty much going to cost the same thing. My internet bill or my electricity bill, that might fluctuate a little bit due to seasonality or something like that. But I could, kind of translate that into a fixed cost because I know it's coming and I know it's there. Employees, if I have employees that I pay on a regular basis and there's a bare minimum staff that I always need to have in place to make that happen, that becomes a fixed cost. Now, what's a variable cost? Well, a variable cost is one that changes. Now, the way I like to think about the variable cost is the variable cost is proportionate to my sales volume, okay? Now, what this means is if I have one notebook, my cost to produce this notebook is probably going to be like, what, $8, and then maybe $1 to sell it, and maybe I'll get $1 in profit. Now, if I want to sell like 100 units, if I make a bigger order with the book company, usually they'll give me a discount because it's a little cheaper for them to produce en masse, right? And so if I sell a bunch, so right now what happens is my costs decrease the more that I order, right? And that's on the supply side. Now, if I sell, let's say that I sell 100 books and I'm generating like maybe $1, $1.50 in profit for each book. Okay, cool. But what if I sell 200? My cost is probably going to decrease even more, which means that my profit will increase if I keep it the same, if I keep the price the same. So the idea is that my costs change based on how many units I'm actually selling. Okay, so another example is in the cupcake shop. The more cupcakes we sell, the more our costs increase for ingredients. It stays the same for rent, but it changes with the amount that we're selling. Okay, so how do you capture all that? Well, you use that spreadsheet down there, and that's in a separate class, so I won't get into too many of those details. What I want to do now is talk to you about revenue streams, because revenues are what offset the costs. Now, what I'm going to do is when I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, what are my revenue streams and how do they work and all that other kind of stuff? I'm going to come back over here to that desirability portion of the canvas. I'm going to say, okay, well, how do I know what I can charge people? Well, first of all, I know who my customer segments are, and I know what their price point sensitivity is based on this conversation that I've already got with them. And if I have a transactional relationship, then there's certain revenue streams that I can employ. And if there's a lifetime or an ongoing relationship, then there's other revenue streams that I can employ. So the next question is, okay, well, what are the revenue streams? I got you. All right, let's talk about 6 basic types of revenue streams that you can have. Now, Just because we're listing them out one by one doesn't mean that they can't be combined. Okay, these are just like the building blocks. So number one, it's called an asset sale. And an asset sale is basically, I have a thing, I give you the thing, you pay me for the thing, and then cool, we're done, right? So transactional, very transactional. It basically means that I have a thing, and then, you know, I'm making money with you selling the thing. Now, the second one is called a usage fee. And a usage fee is basically, I have a thing, and I allow somebody to pay me to use it for a while. Okay, so a good example of this is like a bridge toll. All right. 3 is lending, renting, or leasing. Now, the difference between the usage fee and the lending, renting, or leasing is this. Lending, renting, or leasing gives my customer exclusive use of the asset for a specified time period. Okay, so the usage fee, just like a bridge, like everybody's using it, they're just paying to use it or whatever. But if I have like a car, a house, or like a thing, like this is like a special notebook that not everybody gets, and like I only have like a finite amount of them, and you want to rent it, you can rent the notebook. If you, I don't know that you would, but anyways, the idea is that I'm basically like giving that asset, like giving that person exclusive use of the asset for a particular time period, and that's what they're paying for. Okay, now let's look at number 4, which is subscription. Subscription, which is basically like if you're familiar with magazines or software or newspapers, that kind of stuff, it's basically like ongoing payments. The internet business was definitely a subscription because people would do like month-to-month type stuff, right? They would pay for their internet for a month, and that's what we would charge them for. Now the cupcake thing is pretty much all an asset sale, right? Because we're making things and we're selling them to people. All right, so number 5 is licensing. I'm just like this getting in the way here. A licensing. Okay, so if you've ever used Microsoft Word or any kind of other software, basically what they've done is they have this thing, they replicate it a bunch of times, and you get to use it for your own personal use, your commercial use, all that kind of stuff, and they call that a license. So it's very similar to the lending, renting, and leasing. It's in the usage fee. It's just that you get to do stuff with it, right? Okay, now the 6th form is advertising. If you've seen newspapers, magazines in the old school, and then Facebook in the new, well, I guess in the last 10 years school, advertising is this method of making money that that is number 6 on the list. It's basically like the bottom line with advertising is, as the entrepreneur, what I have is I have a bunch of people's attention. I have an audience, right? And what I'm doing is I'm selling access to that audience, and that's what advertising is. Okay. Okay, so if those are the 6 types of revenues that we can get, how do we break down revenues? Well, we do it the same way that we do the costs. We have startup revenues or one-time revenues, and then we also have ongoing revenues. Okay, so one-time revenues are basically like, you know, for the internet business, it was like, we're going to put in infrastructure for the client, and then they have to pay for that. And then the ongoing cost was like the internet subscription for, you know, month over month and all that other kind of stuff. One time is like setup fee. So that like if I'm a t-shirt printer or something like that, I got to set up the screen, I got to set up the equipment, all that kind of stuff. I charge a fee for that. And then after that, then I charge per unit or per t-shirt. So that's how I kind of think about that. So there's one-time costs and ongoing costs. What that does is it helps me kind of like, you know, do apples to apples and oranges to oranges over here when I'm looking at this formula of, you know, what my costs are and what my revenues are. Okay. So that wraps up the discussion, very high level on, you know, the viability is, will it make money? Basically, how I look at this whole thing is I say, okay, well, let me look at this. I have a value proposition, and I've got customers, and I'm communicating the value to the customers, and based on my relationships, I'm going to charge them this way. That's going to produce this one-time cost for me and this ongoing cost for me. Cool. So I've basically got like the money in part figured out. Then what I say is, okay, well, can I actually make this thing that I told them I could make? So I look at it and I break it down. I'm like, okay, this is the thing. This is what I need to make it. This is what I need to do to create it. This is the help I need. And this is what they're going to charge me. At first, they're going to charge me to set it up. And as I continue to be in business and I keep making it work, those are the ongoing costs that I'm going to have. Okay, so basically what I've got is this big cycle with little cycles in between that are kind of like showing me what's happening in the business. All right, now, here's the cool part, at least another cool part for me, is once I understand all of this and how it like fits together, I look at this document right over here and I'm like, what a piece of cake. Marketing plan? Oh, I know where that goes. That goes in the channels. Finance? Easy. That goes right over here. When we're talking about like costs and variable costs and all that kind of stuff. Like the finance stuff, I'm looking at the spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, I understand how this all works and how this is all hanging together. Operations? That seems like resources and activities to me. And organization? That's all. Well, let's see, resources, if I'm in-house, human resources, or if I'm doing other stuff with contractors and that kind of thing, then I just call that there. And those are like the main pieces of the business plan, right? Super cool. Because now I can look at all this and I'm gonna be like, oh, let's look at this real quick. Marketing plan, market research. Let's see, what is the market research stuff? Barriers to entry, threats and opportunity. Like we're looking at the broader market there. Like this is where we're finding our customer segments. We already know this. We know how to do it. Total size of the industry. Well, however many other people are actually making notebooks. And how do I find that out? There's public data sets to find that out, guys. It's like, we know what this is. Like we've kind of like decoded this business plan without actually having like gone through it, right? Next is operational plan. Quality control. This is just a procedure of how I actually do the things with my key activities with those key resources that I have. Location. Okay, what kind of setup do I have? Well, my key partner told me which entity type I want to have, right? Personnel, we just talked about that, if they're contractors or if they're employees, that kind of thing. Let's look over here. Oh yeah, we did talk about inventory. We talked about baseline inventory. We talked about people that were going to help us like actually get that inventory, like the suppliers and like what their credit policy. We know all of this. It's so cool, right? So now we see that like everything that's in this business plan, yeah, it might be more granular and it might be like set out, but we have basically the framework to help us think through all this stuff so it's not daunting anymore, okay? And really at the end of the day, like I said, we're just answering these three questions. Can we sell it? Can we make it? Or will it make money? Okay. All right. So the final thing that I'd like to talk about, actually, it's a good point to pause and see if there's any questions before we move on to the final piece, which is different model types. Looks like everybody's good. All right, cool. Sweet. Nice. Thanks, Adriana. All right, so let's look at a couple different models. Now, this is where we start getting into some real powerhouse innovation stuff. I'm erasing this as you, yeah, you don't need me to tell you that, right? You can see it. Okay. All right, now I'm gonna put these back over here real quick. Finance, education, there we go. All right. So we can use this business model canvas to actually help us look at different models and how they work, which is dope. There is an article out there, and we don't have time to go through it, and you'll see why in a second. Just from the title, The title is 55 Types of Business Models. Okay. Now, a good friend of mine, his name is Josh David Miller, JDM for short. He's in the Sacramento startup ecosystem, turned me on to this idea. And this idea is how we shift our perspective in thinking about new business models. Okay, so the idea here is what I want to do is I want to start off looking at my current model. So let's say cupcakes, for example. Here's my value prop. Emotionally, what it does depends on the customer segment, but it basically helps people express things, either to themselves or to loved ones. And then functionally, what it is a confection. So it's edible. Okay. Now, what I do is I sell it to different types of people for different purposes. And the way I do that is they come into the store. So it's basically a point of sale. And I let them know when I have deals, and I let them know when, you know, that we're actually there and we exist and all that kind of stuff via Facebook. And because, you know, we have a storefront, so that's sort of a marketing channel as well. Okay, my relationships are pretty much transactional. And what I do is I have bundled products, right? So I have just different types of assets. So that's what I would call the traditional business model. Now, the key resources that we have, you know, we have the equipment, we have the ingredients, and we have packaging, and of course, you know, the store, and all the accoutrements that go with that. And then, you know, the things that we do over and over again is baking, selling, packaging, that kind of thing. And we have vendors for a bunch of stuff, and we have service providers. Okay, so the way that costs us is we have a bunch of fixed costs, and we have a bunch of variable costs. Okay, so that's a traditional business model, right? That's like, that's the deal. It's basically like, you know, we have this idea of this value proposition that we sell to the customers in exchange for currency. And then after that, we create it, and there's costs associated therewith. Very, very simple way to look at the business model. Now, what you can do is you can map out your current business model, just like I did. And you can say, okay, well, this is basically business as usual. And then what you could do is you can come over here to this article that talks about 55 different types of business models. And you could say, what would it look like if I had this type of business model instead? Super powerful, because what this does is it challenges the way that we think about business as usual. So let's do a quick example. Let me pick I'm going to pick, there's a model called a multi-platform or a multi-sided, yeah, we're going to go with something called a multi-sided business model or a multi-sided platform, okay? So what's a multi-sided platform? It basically says that if you have, here, let me come over here and kind of draw this out, very high level. So a multi-sided model basically says, okay, well, I've got this value proposition in the middle, and I have this customer over here, and I have this customer over here. Now, this customer provides this half of the value proposition, and this customer provides this other half of the value proposition. So me, what I'm doing is I'm creating that space to create that value proposition. And that space is where both of those customer segments actually come together, okay? So what's a good example of this? Google is a super example of this. So we have Google, which has basically one customer segment, which are people that are looking for info, right? And then the other segment are business people or people that want to advertise. Now, the way they work this out is this costs nothing for people that are searching, and the advertising is actually where they make their money, right? Google Ads, display network, all that kind of stuff. They say, oh, well, if we have, this tool that these people will use for free, then these people can actually access these folks for a fee. And so what Google's done is they've created this platform that's useful for this segment, and then it's also accessible by this segment. And so that's how we have this thing called a multi-sided platform. Okay. Now, let's come down here and let's say that I want to make the cupcakes a multi-sided platform. Like, how am I going to do that? All right. So step one is I have this idea, right? I'm like, oh, how would I actually figure this out? What would this look like if this traditional business model here, what would it look like if it was a multi-sided platform? What would my value proposition look like? Well, I don't know. I mean, it'd still have cupcakes, right? So remember that 0.5 thing that we talked about before? I would come over here and I'd be like, okay, well, I'm still going to do cupcakes. Let's just assume I'm just going to do cupcakes still. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my customers and I'm going to say, okay, well, multi-sided, right? Multi-sided basically says that I need this segment to be present in order for this segment to derive value. So, I already know that this segment over here loves cupcakes and they want to eat cupcakes and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just going to keep that. Now, this other segment, what if they have a passion for making cupcakes? What if I could provide a space where I'm making cupcakes too, right? But what if these folks need a place to make new, different creations and they need a place to sell it? Well, maybe that's a thing. So what I could do is I could look at this and I could say, okay, well, these are a bunch of customers that maybe don't have the assets that I do. And maybe they want to get in front of an audience. Maybe they want to grow their own, maybe that kind of thing, right? Now I'm still having the customers that want to eat and buy cupcakes. So what I've done is if I look at this conceptually, I could say, oh, well, maybe if I can find this other customer segment right over here on top, if I could find those folks, maybe I could actually create a space for them. Now I have like this total different idea about business as usual. And that's how I kind of change it up, right? So if I have the customers, if I have the value prop, now what I would need to do is go into this planning phase of, okay, well, how would I even float that idea? Figure it out, just like using that little process that we talked about before. And then it'd be like, okay, let me take a guess at the customer relationships. Like, how would the first segment, how would I charge them? Would it be asset sale, usage fee, subscription, that kind of stuff? Lots of opportunity there, right? And then how do I charge the people that want cupcakes? There's like commission stuff there. Now there's like, like marketing fee. Now there's like advertising, maybe a bunch of like different revenue streams have come up. Just FYI, I want to acknowledge that it's 12:30. I'm going to wrap up here real quick as soon as I just give me about like maybe 5-7 minutes. And if you have to go, that's cool too. I totally get it. Thanks for bearing with me. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm taking business as usual, looking at a different model and seeing, well, what would my model look like if it was that model? So I'm looking at this multi-sided platform and saying, okay, well, how can I what would it look like if, right? So it's just a thought exercise. So I'm looking at my customer segments thinking maybe I could provide a space that would change the way I talked about it. This would change like how people interacted with it. Different relationships mean different revenue streams. And then I would go into the business of once I validated that that was actually the case and people wanted to do that, and it was actually like helping folks out, then I would go over here and I say, okay, was my resources changed? My activities changed? Maybe the activities, maybe instead of doing the same baking, selling, and packaging thing, maybe I need to add something to that. Maybe I need to spin off like a different aspect of the business to handle just curating that first segment worth of people. So I want to ask that. The next thing I want to ask is, okay, what other additional help am I going to need for this? Or are there economies that I can realize by saying, let me get greater bundles of things, that kind of stuff. And of course, that'll just trickle out to, what kind of costs I'm going to have based on all of that. Okay. So, and then once I understand all of this, I mean, we already looked already, like I got the business plan right here. I can like think through some of the granular details, right? Like these are just prompts, right? These help us start to think about things, but those answers come relatively easily if we've got this concept and we understand how that works. Okay. And then, when it comes time to actually like taking the business out on a test drive and just giving my educated guess on, is it going to make money or not? Well, I come over here to my handy spreadsheets, put in some numbers, and I look at it. Okay, so I acknowledge that it's not, there's not a magic wand, right? I mean, as entrepreneurs, we have to do this ourselves, right? But the process, right? The process is there. And it's like, if you know the process, then you know at least what to ask for. You at least know like what kind of help to get or to seek out and that kind of thing, right? Okay, so again, just to wrap up that innovation discussion, like how do we figure out how to do stuff differently? Here's what I would recommend. Number one, map out your canvas in your business just as you know it. Just be like, yeah, I did this, we do that. Just very simple. Take about like 10 minutes to do it, right? Or 30, that's okay, but avoid getting too deep into the weeds because this is just a thought exercise. And then what you want to do is you want to look at different types of models. I do have this article. I also have some other resources that like some videos that will show you like 6 different types of typical models. So there's the classic, there's a multi-sided platform, there's the unbundled business model. We don't have time to go into all of it, but I do have some additional materials. If you'd like to learn those, let me know, send me an email, and I'll make sure that you get those. So again, the process is map out your current business, pick out a model that you think is cool. Just have an idea, just say, okay, well, what would this look like if my business looked like that? And then you would be surprised at how many cool ideas this helps you generate. Now, at some point you got to be like, wow, I just blew my own mind. What do I do? Right? It always comes down to these 3 questions is, while we're thinking about it, great. But at the end of the day, also, we need to execute it. So we also want to just do a sanity check, right? So after we have all these awesome ideas, we come back and we say, okay, what do I need to do to sell it? And do I have the wherewithal to make that happen? And then same thing for those other questions, okay? All right, so that will wrap up the class. I'll go ahead and just wrap that up, and then we'll leave some time for some questions. So we talked about 4 different things today. We said we wanted to talk about business models and business plans and what they look like, and we wanted to see this thing called the business model canvas to help us just really just get our heads around this whole thing, so that we know how to think about it holistically, so we can plan for the future and we can just sanely think about business. And we said those 3 questions were really the keys. Can we make it? Can we sell it? Will it make money? And then what we did is we looked at different types of, well, we didn't really get into the weeds on that, but I showed you a process that you can use to just kind of like think differently about your business model. It would have been cool had we had a little more time. I love talking about all of it. The business model thing and how everything shifts is like fascinating for me. But anyways, that will basically be the class. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and